Everyone, welcome back. We are switching gears a little bit. We've covered cognitive development. We looked at Piaget and information processing and all the changes that take place and the differences in the sexes. Now we're going to shift gears and talk about social emotional development. We're going to talk about identity, peer relationships, and dating. Let's go ahead and jump right in. The first thing we're going to talk about is identity. Now we know that there are a lot of different dimensions to identity. However, a lot of those dimensions are kind of left up to us to decide. How do we feel about our gender identity? What is our sexual orientation? What's our gender expression? What is our family going to look like? What does it look like for our faith? What is our education going to look like? What is our relationship status? There are many, many areas of identity that we get to decide. And we go through a process that begins with identity diffusion. When we're in identity diffusion, this means we kind of lack direction or values and goals. We're not really seeking or reflecting on our identity. We don't really have a lot of thoughts around it. From there, we move into identity foreclosure. And this is where we're in pieces of our identity that we're committed to because we've adopted them from somebody that we admire or an authoritarian figure. So our parents or maybe a faith leader. We kind of don't question what the identity piece is. We just accept it and it becomes part of who we are as well. Now, from there, we can go into identity moratorium, which means that we're not really settled. We start kind of exploring different options. We're thinking about where's the value in holding this identity? Does this make sense for me? Do I relate to this? And from there, if we go through this process, we might go to identity achievement, where we've explored all the alternatives and we've settled on one that we've chosen specifically for ourselves. We're not letting anybody else influence us. We've explored it, we weighed the pros and cons, and now we've settled on it. Now, there are a lot of things that influence whether or not we get to that achievement piece, the first being our personality. If we are somebody who is more open-minded and likely to explore things and options, we're going to be more likely to get to that achievement, that identity achievement. However, if we're somebody who likes to conform, who's typically a little bit more obedient, and we maybe feel a little more uncertain of ourselves or uncertain of different things, maybe a little more anxious, we're going to stay more in that diffusion and foreclosure area. The idea of I'm not really thinking about it, or I'm accepting what everybody has given me and told me to be. The next piece is going to be family. Family is also very influential. So the idea that if we are very closely bonded to a family member, especially a parent or a caregiver, we're more likely to maintain that foreclosure piece, that acceptance of whatever they've taught us. Versus if we have a diverse family or a supportive background family and lots of different ideas and it's accepted to kind of challenge those ideas, we're more likely to get into that achievement phase of really examining what is best for us and making our own decision. Another factor would be peers. If we surround ourselves with like-minded peers who are very similar to us in every way growing up, we're going to be less likely to achieve that achievement identity versus if we have a lot of diverse interactions and our peers encourage us to explore and reflect and really challenge us, then we're going to be more likely to get to achievement. School, community, and culture also all matter. Again, if we're looking in that kind of homogeneous where we're all the same as everybody else, we're going to be less likely to really examine ourselves and our identity versus if we're giving to a lot of diverse opportunities and exploration and we're kind of encouraged to actively learn and challenge things, we're going to be more likely to get that achievement, that identity achievement. All right, moving on to identity and into moral development, I want to talk about Kohlberg's theory. There are three main levels to his theory, and they break down into different stages, 2 stages for each level. The pre-conventional level is where you really are considering and weighing personal consequences. Am I going to get in trouble? Am I going to get acknowledgement? From there, you start thinking about other people, and that's in the conventional level, where you look beyond yourselves and you consider how other people are going to think about you if you engage in something. From the conventional level, you move into the post-conventional level where you start weighing lots of different actions based on a lot of different factors. You're thinking about yourself, you're thinking about how others view you, you're thinking about how it might impact other people, how it might impact society as a whole. And again, each one of those levels breaks down into 2 stages. So we have the pre-conventional level is stage 1 and 2. In the first stage, you're really activated by not wanting to get in trouble, but then in stage 2, that moves more towards less wanting to get in trouble, less worrying about getting in trouble, and more kind of focused on being acknowledged or being reinforced for your behavior. And then you go into the conventional level, which is stages 3 and 4, where you're more motivated to keep people happy, and you don't want to experience that shame and guilt when people are disappointed in you. Now you go into the post-conventional level, which is stages 5 and 6, and you're more motivated to kind of the respect of others and self, and also motivated by not wanting to go against your own value system, not wanting to feel that sense of real shame and guilt by disrupting your value system. Now, there are some differences in genders and sexes, I should say. Women tend to move more quickly from stages 2 to stages 3. Men, when they talk about morality, they're going to focus more on talking about issues of justice, where women typically focus more on empathy. We see stage 3 really occurring in mid-adolescence, and stage 4 rises through college. Now, not everybody is going to make it to stage 5 and 6. And another thing to note is that this theory is a little flawed in the sense that you don't always keep progressing down. A lot of our reasoning for our morality comes from multiple stages. We pull from different stages depending on the circumstance and the problem. And we can pull from an earlier stage or a later stage, or we can pull from multiple at once. So it's not a direct progression down morality. All right, moving on to what influences our moral decisions, our moral reasoning. First off is going to be our personality. If we are open-minded and we have strong social skills, we're going to have higher moral reasoning. If we have parenting practices that are supportive and really that authoritative parenting where we're listening, we feel heard, we feel like we're part of the decision-making process, that's also going to increase moral reasoning. Peer interaction around being able to engage with a lot of diverse viewpoints, that kind of building that empathy perspective increases moral reasoning. Schooling, if we're able to engage in a school system that has anti-bias curriculum, they have a real focus on making sure that there's no bullying happening. We have a lot of direct messaging and teaching around equality and prejudice. It's not kind of being, swept under the rug, using that figurative language that shows up in adolescence. We see higher moral reasoning as well. Additional things include how we view our own moralities, if it's part of our self-concept, if it's something that's central to who we are, if we believe that we really want to, we see ourselves as a moral person, we're more likely to have higher moral reasoning. The environment we exist in, if we see others going through moral reasoning, modeling it for us, helping us make those decisions, we're likely to have moral reasoning that's a little bit higher. Religion can also support higher moral reasoning, and that's if we have explicit teaching that we should have concern for others. Now, with that being said, there are cases where religion decreases moral reasoning, and that's when we are starting to convey stereotypes or prejudices about certain groups. And in the situation where there's religious cults that kind of take away a person's individuality and free thought and kind of say, this is how you must behave. And as soon as your free thought gets taken away, so does your moral reasoning. So those things, religion can either go one way or the other. It can increase your moral reasoning if you're taught to care for others, but can also decrease your moral reasoning if you are taught to group people together or have prejudices against certain groups or adopt their thinking without being able to think or question it. Okay, moving forward, let's talk about peer interactions. The first thing we're going to talk about is friendships. Now, before I jump into friendships, I want to mention that when you are in early adolescence, you're going to have about 4 to 6 friends. Now, most of you are now adults and moving into adulthood. You might be thinking, well, I don't have 4 to 6 friends, and that's okay because adults really only have typically 1 to 2 very close friends. And with that, let's jump into what other changes happen in adolescence. We know that in friendship for adolescents, we start thinking about friendship differently and why we have friends. And an adolescent would explain to you why they have friends for 3 different reasons. The first being having an intimate or close psychological relationship with somebody, being able to share with them, being able to be yourself, have open and honest communication, share your strengths, your needs, your desires. Another reason you would have friends is because you have that mutual understanding, you have the same values, the same belief systems. Another reason would be that you would need somebody who's loyal, somebody who's going to stand by you no matter what. Now, that is a why of how they would explain why they have friends, but they choose friends based on these characteristics. So in adolescence, you're going to find people who have similar identity statuses as you, same educational aspirations. Do they want to go to college? Do they want to get a job right after high school? Same political beliefs. Are they more likely to be depressed or are they more happy? It's kind of, are they more glass half full? Are they more glass half empty? And the risk-taking behavior. Are they really risky and they like to take a lot of risks or are they not? You're going to definitely choose your friends based on these characteristics. Now, you do see differences in sexes based on what they do with their friends, how they interact with their friends. Girls tend to really lean into emotional closeness. They spend a lot more time talking. They also do what's called co-ruminating a lot more. And this means that they're really focused more on problems. And this can actually cause a problem in friendships because it can have a focus on what's going wrong with them and can cause kind of that friction happening. Girls are actually more likely to break up as well in friendships, and they're more likely to have friends that are the other sex. Boys, however, tend to focus more on achievement and status, so what they've accomplished. When they get together, they're more likely to engage in actual activity, so they don't just meet to talk and have a coffee. They're going to go, bowling, or they're going to go race cars, or they're going to go do a sporting event. Their conflict is typically minimized and resolved pretty quickly, so we see less breakups because they kind of go, it's not a big deal, and move on. All right, moving on to the benefits of relationships. We see the opportunities to explore self and form an identity, and this is because we're able to really have that open, honest conversation. We can talk about our needs, our desires, what we want for ourselves, what our strengths are. We also see that we have some foundations and skills for future intimate relationships, and this is because we're able to have a lot more strong conversations with somebody we're close with. We can engage in problem solving and working out our current problems with our early romantic partners. We see additional coping with stress during adolescence because of higher friendships. So our friendships support our ability to cope with stress, and that's because we get support, we get empathy, and there's this kind of pro-social engagement that's happening. Another benefit would be that we create and support positive attitudes towards school when we have close friendships, just from a place of if you have somebody you can talk to and engage with when you're in school, you are going to be more likely to want to be at school. Okay? Moving on, let's talk about cliques and crowds. So cliques and crowds are definitely something that happened in late mid-childhood, all the way into adolescence. A clique being a group of 3 to 10 people that spend time together and share commonalities, so a background, a value, an attitude, and interest, all of those things. And a crowd being several cliques kind of put together with similar identities that form a larger group in high school, and social structures. And we can think about these kind of in classical terms of, the jocks, the people who are really athletic, right? The people who are academics, academias are kind of, maybe we've heard of nerds, that kind of piece. The partiers, people who like to go out, the popular kids. We kind of all have experienced these ideas of crowds and cliques. Now, my question to you is, do you feel like there are any pros and cons to these concepts? And the reality is that there's both. A pro would be that when you're able to kind of come together with like-minded people, you're able to explore attitudes and acquire additional social skills. This is also where you kind of begin testing romantic partners because you have a lot of similarities with the people you're hanging out with. However, there are some significant cons that come along with this idea. The first being that there's a huge increase in bullying and victimization, and that for students who are not part of higher status crowds, they experience higher levels of anxiety and depression. So definitely some things to be concerned about as we look at cliques and crowds. Now, moving on to dating, really quickly, it's going to be our last thing we talk about. Dating starts with our internal working model. So way back in our infant, toddler, early childhood years, we talked about the internal working model and kind of how our attachment with our parents formed later relationships. This is what's happening for them. They have this attachment with parents, and if it's positive, then that goes on to influence their friendships and having positive relationships with their peers. Now, if that remains positive, then that means that when they go into their first romantic relationships, that's also going to be a positive thing. Another thing that impacts whether or not dating can be positive in our relationships is how parents model working through problems and conflict resolutions for their children. So if parents are very collaborative and work together in a very calm nature, they're going to be more likely to have successful dating relationships as well. All right, early dating can have some problems. We know that about 1/4 or 1 out of 4 people have some kind of abuse in a dating relationship. Now, there are some factors that influence that. The first is that if you're engaging in drug use, if there's delinquency happening, if you have poor academics, and if you add that together with uninvolved parenting and having early experiences with aggression, and this could be from parents or peers, then these things are likely to happen in dating. You're more likely to experience physical abuse, you're more likely to experience sexual abuse, and you're more likely to experience mental health issues, thinking about PTSD, depression, being suicidal. All of those things increase. So if you kind of have this baseline and then you add it with other pieces, you're more likely to have significant issues with your dating life. Okay? With that, we're going to take a break here. We're going to come back and we're going to do our last part of our lecture, problems with development. I'll see you then.